Print Your Games, the podcast about what's new and awesome in 3D printing for gaming. I'm one of your hosts, Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param, and I'm joined by
Kristen Sowards, also known as Seventh Mastery.
Kristen. We're back from Gen Con. We're rested
Mhm.
up.
Yeah.
And, we wanted a nice, easy topic, something that was going to be fun and relaxing and just non controversial to go through. So, tonight's topic is: can 3D printing escape the shadow of Games Workshop? And I'm going to say that with ominous intent
Dun,
for
dun,
the
dun.
dramas. And I am not one to just farm drama for drama's sake, so don't expect that in my half of this conversation here. But there's some unavoidable truths to the 3D printing space and how much Games Workshop influences it, not just it, but almost all of miniatures.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we will get in that later. But before we jump onto the main topic, as always, Kristen, you been working on anything cool for 3D printing?
Yes. My High Falls homebrew D&D session is getting unstable players. So we launched a Journeys to the Radiant Citadel based secondary campaign.
I want to play Radiant Citadel.
It's super fun. And because that has a lot of European mythologies, I actually got to print some really fun kind of more these guys I think are Indonesian themed, Bakio maybe, or they're super cool. I used them for Storm Spirits.
Explain them. They can't
Oh
see.
yes, to the people who can't see. So this is a mini Monster Mayhem miniature. It came from their Dynasty set, I think, from several months back. But this is a big, huge, think like a cougar or a lion. But it's got 3 tails, and then it has this really cool battle armor that's incredibly textured, and it paints up like a dream. I had actually not ever busted out my Speed Paint 2.0 metallics yet. And so I thought, well, I should try those. And the combination of the textures on this thing, there's swirly, jagged, curling, metallic. If you've seen Magic the Gathering, you might have the Esper, kind of like Ethereum metal swirls, very similar aesthetic. But yeah, it's got this kind of metal armor, and it's very easy to two-tone it and get a striking thing. I did a base dark silver and some gold filigree stuff. They painted up just fantastic. This just one set. You can get them, the Bakyu, I think, by themselves, but that's also part of that huge monthly release, of course. And I got it for $10.
They look so cool. They really do. And I just there's so many things I could use them for.
Oh yeah.
And Mini Monster Mayhem just does some fantastic sets, and I love that they reach into them and Clay Cyanide especially. They just really take a lot of chances with a whole lot of different sources and a lot of different inspirations, and very much the exact opposite of today's topic is a lot of what they go
exactly. And kind of cool though, Clay Cyanide still also throws in a skirmish level theme set. They are unique theme sets, but you get their mythology set, and you get bunny people or walrus dudes or whatever, and so you get a second set of minis that's very good for a skirmish game, OPR Fantasy Skirmish, or what is it? It's just Skirmish, isn't it?
Yeah, Age of Fantasy Skirmish.
That's the one. And you could also use them in any number of miniature agnostic. Speaking of our topic, I also though did all the adventurers for that for the Radiant Citadel game. I did them all in Eldritch Foundry and built those out, and that was super fun.
Very cool, very cool. I was kind of jealous about those because they look so awesome, and I'm like, I don't know what I'd use them for, but I like it when I see those models. Every so often, I'll see one of those models, and I have no use for you. I will find a use for you. You look so cool. I've latched onto you. I'm those gave me that reaction. When I saw the Triceratops, they were basically meant to be stand-ins for Ogryn in Warhammer Fantasy, but instead of being Ogryn, they were freaking Triceratopses.
Yeah. Super cool.
Yeah, and it was awesome. And I don't know what just happened, but music started playing randomly in my ear.
The good news is we cannot hear it.
Good, because I was panicking about getting copyright striked because I tapped my headset and it
You are
determined that you need to play your Spotify right now.
You are okay.
Yeah, and that was that one. And like I've seen so many of these. Like famously, I always bring up like when Against the Giants came out, which is old D&D miniature set, and they had a frost giant riding a mammoth with his spear up in the air, and I'm like, yes, I will find an encounter to put that in.
Yes.
And I love it when minis like, and 3D printing has made that happen so often and often and often again, because there are just like thousands of models coming out every single month from some really brilliant creators taking some interesting twists on things. And it's just almost impossible to keep up. I think it is impossible to keep up with everything. I can't imagine anybody is printing the entirety.
So if
of
you
the
use
releases.
just a little, I mean, it's okay. I'm not gonna lie, it is time intensive to look at all the previews. But if you keep a good eye, you can like turn off and on Patreons and tribes and try to get that. Occasionally, there are a couple people who I adore that don't release their previews on time, and suddenly you're like, do I stay sub to you or not? But you can always drop it and then add it back mid-month. So
right.
My biggest problem is when I drop it with the intention of re-adding if I like it, and then I don't go back and check in time and I miss a month. That Bite the Bullet for me, I've missed so many good sets from Bite the Bullet because I'm like, well, I don't want goblins. Next set comes out and it's like, Crimson Death Angels or something, and I really wanted that. And then like,
and we're the opposite. I'm like, Crimson Death Angels, give me the bunny people.
Yeah. Well, I have quite a stash of bunny people at this point.
There's been a lot. Do you know why there's so many bunny people?
Oh, it's Beyond the Witchlight added Herringon to D&D, and then at the same time they became playable in Final Fantasy 14. And if you are a Final Fantasy 12 fan, Fran,
yes,
we have a lot of VR stands out in the community.
Yeah, I've been playing Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, which is where they came from, and that's yeah.
I did not know that. I have them because I play Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, which is
indeed. There are a lot of Final Fantasy STLs out there.
Yes. Blasted Samaflange says, I need to make bunny people with guns. Sure. I would take sci-fi. He says with guns, prefer the sci-fi. I would take sci-fi bunnies for sure.
There is, if anime has taught me anything, there is plenty of room for animal people with guns.
With guns. It's true. It's true. I actually go back and blame Bravestar because his horse would change and had Sarah Jane, the big gun. And he would always be like, I'll just use Sarah Jane. Yeah, anyway.
I love Bravestar. And I thought that was like one of the few people who even remembered it.
Oh, no. Permanently stained on my brain.
So speaking of permanent, so for me, I haven't been doing much 3D printing anything lately. Mainly because of two things. One, very busy catching up with all the stuff OPR related after leaving Gen Con, because hey, when you work for OPR, lots of stuff happens all the time. And then the Saturn 3 came in, and I want to use my Saturn 3. But you know what's in the way?
Dealing with your old Saturn?
Yes, I have my old Saturn, and more importantly, my old Saturn's wash and cure station. So like my little 3D printing area is like just really big enough for the wash and cure station and the Saturn to be there comfortably. And when I borrowed my friend's printer, I was able to have two printers in the wash and cure station, and it was a bit cramped but usable. And that stuff is in the way. Also, it's like filled with dirty IPA, so that's going to take time to deal with.
Isn't that the worst? Especially if you let
it's the worst part of this whole hobby. So like I have a few set ways that I deal with it. Okay. And like first things first, the answers that you do not do is pour it down the drain,
of course,
or dump it on the ground outside, because you do not want to contaminate your groundwater or your plumbing. Don't do that.
Put it where the sun's gonna hit it and just turns it.
Yeah. So what I do is I go to my local grocery store and I give them $1 for a turkey pan.
Okay.
And then I pour it into the turkey pan and I set it out in the sun. And why I do that is it has so much more surface area than just leaving a bottle out, which only has a little bottle to evaporate. So it evaporates very quickly, and the sun cures it super, super fast and well, especially since it's reflective from the bottom. And it just evaporates that stuff in a real big hurry and gets rid of it. And then
Sure.
I have just this big old bunch of cake stuff that I throw in the trash bag and I'm done.
See, but my internal hoarder wants to take a bunch of my supports and then put that goo in the bottom, let it bake off all the alcohol and harden, and get like this apocalyptic melted like looking terrain piece out of it.
So I find that that doesn't happen. What happens is you get poison jello.
Ew.
It's like this squishy, spongy like substance. The dirty it is, the worse it gets.
So I've taken to doing like a milk jug, and it does turn into just like a big gray gooey blob inside there. But I thought it was maybe because I wasn't letting stuff evaporate. But you're confirming that it's just poison jello no matter what.
Well, because it's like it's almost impossible to get it completely separated from the alcohol. So it's not like you would have to like filter it to get it back to mostly resin and not resin bonded with alcohol.
We do not advise doing any of these things yourself for your own
Yeah,
safety.
please be very responsible with your stuff and safe. But evaporating it and where the sun can cure it is the best way to get rid of the stuff. Also, alcohol evaporates super fast anyway.
Sure.
And this is actually one of the other reasons I don't like water washable resin, because water evaporates much, much slower and is harder to deal. Like, sure, you up until the getting rid of it stage, you've only had to deal with water, but the water dirty with resin, even though it's water washable resin, is still toxic. So it still has to be dealt with, which means you're still left with the same solutions as the others of getting it out in the sun and evaporating it. But it takes longer because it's water instead of alcohol.
Yeah, makes sense.
So
I'm sorry
I need
you
to
haven't
find out what
got
to
to
do.
print much. That's a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah. I have a new wash and cure station with the Saturn 3 that's sized for the Saturn 3, and they're both waiting. So what ultimately I need to do is to get rid of my old wash and cure station and put my new one up, and then decide if I'm going to box away the Saturn or am I going to keep a Saturn and have
Or
two
you're going to
Saturns.
slowly turn into a print farm.
Right. Am I slowly going to turn into a print farm? It's going to be like Ultra Magnus towards the end.
You know. You do you.
And I might. No, to be honest, I very like. There's a few times like panicking before a convention when I really needed that extra print capacity.
Oh yeah,
I've
definitely.
Of the time, but I hate to say it, most of my time my printers sit idle, not printing anything, because I print at the speed of using them.
Yeah, I think what it gets me, and the reason I would want to sometimes, is like, cast and plays interior exterior thing. It's just about to finish. And if I wanted to use a set of that stuff to make a nice board, either for skirmish or for an RPG, I would print up a couple trays of that, but I'd also still probably be printing the monsters, and that would be rough to do both of those sets. Because for me, at least, passable table ready terrain, very quick paint up.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Monster, little slower. Although with speed paint and slab chop, it's getting better to the point where I can field a whole table with custom minis and custom terrain. But that's still a lot to do printing time wise, right? And so a second printer does sort of appeal to me.
Yeah, thank the glories above for Slap Chop. Slap Chop is a fantastic way of getting stuff out quickly.
Honestly, I would have already ordered it, but I think the last day of Gen Con, I finally cracked because I ran into Paradigm Concepts, and I've always liked Arcanus, and they had a lot of their harder to track down titles just sitting there on a table, and I was like, damn it. So I had to buy one. Or actually, a couple.
Excellent.
I still regret not buying the GM screen, though, because there's only like 5 of those left in print, period, and it was sitting right there.
Why didn't you get it?
Because I didn't have bag space, and then if I had thought,
I remember this was a thing. It's like you and bag space were the ultimate enemies of each other.
It's true. It's true. And if I had actually thought, because as you recall, I gave you that one pack of gaming paper grids. If I knew I was going to do that, I would have got that GM screen. But I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, and this is why I like living close enough to Gen Con to just drive up. Honestly, Kentucky is like super great, convenient wise, because I'm a day's drive from Gen Con, Origins, Dragon Con, and PAX.
Yeah, that's kind of amazing, actually. Now that I think about it.
Yeah, so I can hit all the East Coast conventions within a day drive, and it's wonderful.
Yeah, I'm close to nothing except for our Vanix, which is decent size for a state one, but it's still not any of those shows.
But but you know what we're gonna have to talk about now?
What's that?
The sad. Not really. So if you've been 3D printing miniatures for any amount of time or involved in 3D printing gaming, um, it's hard to not notice that the majority of Patreons and creators out there create miniatures intended to be useful for a certain fan base. And that fan base are the players of Games Workshop's various games.
With a slight subset of RPG used for D&D after that.
Notice I said majority.
Yeah.
And I do think that when I first got into it, that was more like a 50-50 split.
Mm-hmm.
And it has not become a 50-50 split.
I mean,
it has become a majority Games Workshop hobby.
You got I think a couple of things feeding into that, right? You have the proxy people, right? Like everybody wants to run, like me. I like OPR, I like Games Workshop stuff. I don't have a ton of people who would let me play proxies, but if someone said, hey, I really want to play 40K, I could field the Chaos Army with minimal effort. I might have to go print a few rank and file Chaos Marines, but I could do that in like a night, right? And again, slap chop them up pretty quick. But I have tons of demons that would work, and I can do that quickly, right? But like, when it comes to other things, you know, bespoke stuff, like I really want, say, Blasted Salmon Flange, and I'm not picking on you. You're saying you're going to do your tactic game here with animal people with guns. If it gets a rabid following, it will do okay. But there's that siren of always having a rabid following if you can tap Warhammer's market. And
I think you're kind of keying onto the why of it, which we'll get into.
Oh,
but I kind of want to prove my point first.
Okay.
So STL Top, great website. We mention it all the time. Is a way to track, you know, the top performing STL company, the gaming miniature producers. And just going down the list, there's OPR. I can't talk about OPR.
I've never heard of them. Who are they? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I can't. In this frame of conversation, I have to.
But I can. They're number one with a silver bullet. Anyway.
Yeah. Then there is Titan Forge, and Titan Forge used to lean a lot less in the, like, they were kind of even split, like releasing a bunch of stuff really useful for RPGs and releasing stuff for Oldhammer, and then they have Cyberforge. But now it is like most of their stuff is meant for Warhammer inspired gaming. So like the Ninth Age, which is a successor game to Warhammer Fantasy. It's a fan-made successor to that. And then on Cyberforge, it's just like very clearly they've got like one half of the entire Cyberforge releases called their Grimdark release, and it's meant for
it totally is a 40K tag on for sure.
But they do a bunch of Cyberpunk stuff too.
So
that's
what I point out about STL Top though is that Cyberforge is not counted in the Titan Forge number. It's its own number later.
Oh crap! Okay.
So that is a little closer to that OPR, whoever they are, people, but it's still leaps and bounds, I think, above most things.
Then you got ILMZ 4250.
Yeah.
They're just dedicated to role playing.
Yeah.
All right. Then you got Arc Villain Games. Arc Villain Games used to be dedicated to role playing. Their fantasy side still is kind of dedicated to role playing.
Although very strong high elf proxy sets have been sneaking out, by the way.
Yeah. And Arc Villains stupidly good quality miniatures.
Yeah.
And then if you look at their sci-fi offering, it is explicitly Warhammer inspired,
but like really sexied up. Like they did a lot of like new theming. Like if you want the Necron army but want it like Egyptian, hardcore Egyptian vibe, that's their Necron army, right? And like they definitely, it's got a little identity, but it's still clear what they're doing.
Yeah. Lord of the Print does their own thing and very RPG focused. Honestly, I would say more gigantic fantasy statue focused, but like absolutely lovely miniatures.
Gonna poke a hole in you on this one a little bit. They actually have 2 Chaos armies recently.
They have released stuff that is for the sake of conversation. I'm going to just say Grimdark inspired.
Yeah, but there's
Because
also a
Grimdark
Chaos
applies to
Fantasy
both the
army.
fantasy and
Sure.
the 40K things.
Fair enough.
So they have released a couple of Grimdark inspired stuff, but that's not the majority of their release.
I mean, they still really, I think, are known for having their big monster or 2 monsters of the month, right?
Right.
To me, that, like when we went to Gen Con, when you looked at the resellers, the licensed merchants, it was always the big dragons. It was always the big angel. It was always the big, like, stunning jaw dropper from a monthly release.
That Tiamat they released, I keep seeing that again and again, and it's massive, and it's so much better than the WizKids Tiamat.
For sure, for sure.
Cast and Play started off pure D&D support, 5e releasing everything with dungeon tiles and stuff, and the last year or so, it's been like very grimdark releases, big old army sets, no terrain, like very much proxy friendly gaming involved there.
Yeah, until this most recent Mage Guild set, I really, I normally have a lot of FOMO when I missed out on them, but this last year, because of what you're talking about, it's like, well, if I want that, ogre set or whatever, I'm gonna go get it from Artisan Guild. I'm gonna go get it from wherever. And so a lot of Cast and Play, yeah, I've missed a lot of them because of that. But speaking of Artisan Guild, go ahead.
Then there's Artisan Guild, who is very grimdark inspired stuff, which is like grimdark useful minis, very much inspired by World of Warcraft's aesthetics. And that is the thing. Every creator here, I'm not saying they're making copycat minis. They're absolutely not. They're throwing their own spin. They're just making sure that they're usually also things that could be easily used for people who play GW inspired wargaming.
And I do appreciate the niche because, like, for instance, how many you could easily go out and buy, like, Warhammer Fantasy 6th edition books for like pennies on the dollar.
No,
and
go humongously expensive.
No, really?
Yeah,
like even beat up ones.
Yeah.
Okay. You could also get PDFs. I'm just gonna say it. You could acquire the rule set, but you can't acquire the army anymore. And if you want to play that rule set, this feels
like we mentioned, like when we first got into this, Oldhammer was like literally probably the biggest niche. Like not even stuff for modern, like 40K or Age of Sigmar. It was Oldhammer stuff, and I think that's because Total War had made Oldhammer cool again, and Vermintide also came in to do that. So there was a lot of like new stuff in the zeitgeist that was making the old world very awesome, and you couldn't get those minis. And also those minis were made in the 90s and the early 2000s, and they looked a little derpy because they really leaned into a aesthetic there, like a very exaggerated comical aesthetic.
There was something about the Imperials with their big plumes, but cast in pewter was like just so clunky.
And that was the other thing, is like stuff that's cast in pewter, like metal miniatures, they're glorious, but getting super fine detail on metal is more difficult than it is in plastic. And also those molds degrade faster.
True.
So that's there. Two of the identical mini could have drastically different quality control. Anyway, so having the stuff that looked like these video games we were playing, or how we remembered it, or the art that inspired it, was suddenly possible with with the new creators creating Oldhammer stuff that looked fantastic, or was like a complete new spin on the concept.
Right.
Cyberforge. We already talked about Cyberforge.
Yeah.
Very Oldhammer. Dragon Trapper's Lodge has become very grimdark inspired
because they added that second tier that has the grimdark offering, and good on them, because they're not always grimdark, but they are definitely war game releases for sure.
Printing Goes Ever On falls into this category, even though they're doing their own thing. It's Lotro inspired,
right?
But they're targeting the people who play the Lotro games.
I think that's fair. I think that's fair statement.
Which is again made by Games Workshop,
right?
But if you're also just wanting cool Lotro miniatures for role playing, fantastic place. All these people, they're not discouraging their original artistic. We're just talking about common uses, target markets for their
So are
stuff.
we 11th place there for DM Stash?
Yeah, DM Stash.
So that to me
RPGs.
is the first RPG focused one that's not cashed in on Grimdark stuff.
Well, no, there's MZ 4250.
Oh, that's true.
Completely
But
RPG.
but that's also like mostly free stuff, right? So
yeah,
I don't know. Like pay to play
Mhm.
DM Stash feels like the first D&D focused. Now, granted, it's also super D&D focused. One that doesn't have like a very clear Grimdark attachment.
Right. Cobra Mode. They're one of the boutique miniatures.
Yeah, so I would say
Lord
one
Print
of
would
the
fall into
holdouts
same.
against this phenomenon.
Yeah, Lord of the Print would also classify as boutique, but they're like also super successful and they do very cool dragons.
And they
Highland
have their
Miniatures,
squads, but yeah, Highland Miniatures.
amazingly grimdark. They are like, honestly, if you like Oldhammer, Highland Miniatures, you need to pay attention to.
Yeah,
The Maker's Cult, the OG of 3D printed grimdark, and also amazing stuff. Print your monsters back and forth between RPG and grimdark.
yeah.
Duncan Shadow, very much grimdark inspired stuff.
But occasional waves of intense cuteness.
Mm-hmm. But also, that intense cuteness is also playable as in grimdark games.
Fair.
Flesh of Gods, RPG focused.
Mm-hmm.
Mia K, it's another MZ 4250 situation. Like, it's mostly free stuff. Very RPG focused. Gamic, extremely grimdark. 3D art guy. So grimdark probably needs to worry.
Yeah, I think a lot of their stuff gets put behind a membership wall that's a little less direct.
Yeah. Mammoth Factory started off super RPG focused, has taken a turn towards the grimdark.
Yeah, I'd still say it's leaning D&D, but you're right.
Titan Troll.
He's normally here to speak for himself, but he's not here today.
Yeah, Titan Troll. It's kind of, I say they mostly focus on original super realistic art, very historical inspired art, very awesome faces, but definitely also influenced by the grimdark. By like even the feature thing for this month is very much Skaven inspired models, and I can understand that. Bestarium Miniatures.
I think we're seeing a third group of influence starting with this one, because
Dark Souls influence.
Dark Souls influence. I was about to say, and so I'm going to say video game influence, because if you look, the next one is Bite the Bullet, and they are so WoW influenced.
So they are WoW influenced, but they always make sure that their stuff is grimdark friendly.
Sure, I mean,
and that kind of comes with the territory.
Sure,
but like they released a whole Sisters of Battle set,
right?
know?
But I do think that we're looking at this third thing is still IP derived, kind of, but from video games mostly.
Mini Monster Mayhem. I don't even know how to classify them. They're definitely doing their own crazy thing. Very, like, I won't say even video game inspired. It's like just craziness inspired. They have, I would say, delves into video games.
They do a very tight theme, but it's a variable theme.
Right, yeah. They're variety. If they were a Twitch streamer, they would be in the variety channel.
Yeah, that's fair.
Unit 9, so cyberpunk it hurts, and I love it.
And this is a quintessential example of I don't like this set, I'm gonna unsub, and then I miss the most amazing set the next month, and I just like kick myself.
White Werewolf Tavern is boutique.
I'd say boutique, but squad friendly. Very much is usually at least a 3 to 4 count unit of some kind that would go into a place.
And then we get to Dragon's Rest, which is unique in that it's terrain. And at this point onwards, we are in sub 1,000 patron territory.
Yeah.
So we've talked about the majority of the market now. I meant the majority of
market share.
Market share. And from here on out, it's down to like
Much
very niche
more.
audiences
Yep.
and independent creators doing very cool things. Like it's not that there's these creators are not worth looking into.
Oh
In fact,
gosh,
the
most
opposite.
most
You
of my
need to go
favorites
pay
are
attention to them.
down there. In
Yeah.
fact,
Mhm.
I can't read it. The one that's right there with the Manticore.
Oh, Yashashi, very D&D focused.
Love it though. A really tight release theme every month. There's always a poll of, hey, what do we want to work on next? And then really kind of a crisp, great take on one or two monsters, maybe a couple poses.
So we went through that whole list, and Grimdark, or GW related gaming use, is the majority of it.
Mhm.
Like by a huge margin. And then like D&D came in like a distant second.
Distant-ish. I still think it's close. But...
I don't think it's close.
Fine.
But is this something that can change? Like, is this the reality that we're always going to be stuck with? Like, is GW going to dictate and influence what is available in the entire 3D sphere? Because like when I first was getting into it, like I was not a war gamer. Like I had appreciation for some Warhammer video games, and I played a little bit with friends' armies and stuff, but I wasn't like deep in the lore. And why are all the Lizard Man wearing Mesoamerican stuff? Like, is it all that way? What's that? Every single lizard model that comes out seems to be decked out in Mesoamerican stuff. And then it's like, wait, what's with all these really fluffy pantaloons on things? Like, why has everybody got like
pantaloons?
Yeah, what's going on with this?
It's like big plumes. They all look like Don Quixote.
Yeah. And it just kept going on and on. It's like until I realized that, oh wait, this is just all like deep into the Warhammer vibe, and meant to be proxies for various things or inspired by those worlds. Like I wouldn't call what Heretic Miniatures makes as proxies. Good Lord, they don't map one-to-one to hardly anything. They're just like unique characters that would very much live in one of those worlds. And even then, a lot of these might not even be direct proxies. They're just very much inspired by that aesthetic. And then you get the opposite, which is it's a proxy, but it has a completely different aesthetic than the standard stuff. And that's kind of where I kind of jive. That's what I really like. It's why I like the Puppets War. The Puppets War stuff is really great for that.
Oh yeah, like the Bushido orcs are the best. That is so cool. It's such a cool vibe. For sure.
And like their cybernetic nids are also really cool.
And I love that it's optional. So if you want to try to proxy them as close as possible to your existing tier nids, you can. But if you want to, you can go, this one has like robot head.
Yeah. And also like the samurai. I like samurai. So they got that whole like samurai ninja aesthetic for the strikers. So if you want your Marines to be a little bit more dexterous, that's always an option.
Sure.
Yeah, but still, like it's that target audience. Like you can make the one-to-one. You say, oh, okay, this is appealing to fans of these other games. And to be fair, we also mentioned this. We didn't mention too much quote unquote RPG inspired miniatures. We did say explicitly D&D audience stuff. And to be super fair, I will say that a lot of those people are also very happy with the Pathfinder fans that find their stuff. I know that MZ4250 has been explicitly making Pathfinder stuff. Bite the Bullet has been explicitly making Pathfinder stuff, like focused at that audience specifically over a generic D&D audience. But in general, Pathfinder itself would be a D&D inspired game.
It's true.
It's part of that lineage,
just like
many of the same people.
Kings of War or OPR.
Yeah, absolutely. Kings of War is most definitely a GW inspired thing. The fact that it's a game that allows you to play with very intentionally the models you have from that other game.
Correct.
Is definitely part of that lineage. And like everything has its niche. Like Kings of War came around when it was like, hey, Rank and Flank is dying because they killed off the old world. And to be fair, it was dying for a while. There was reasons that like the numbers were going down, and a lot of that was self-inflicted wounds. Like
Sure.
GW towards the end was like intentionally making the rules, encouraging you to buy hordes and hordes and hordes of models,
Of
way
course.
more than was practical. Um, and so like Kings of War is a direct response to that. It's like super fast, it's not long. Like
Yeah.
you don't need hordes and hordes of models, but you still want lots of models. And it's like it's all about tactics and ranks and stuff. And it's very much not a mass skirmish Age of Sigmar style thing. It's
Yeah.
not blobs of things clashing together. It's like positioning and trying to get advantage is everything in that game. And it is a stupidly amazing fun game to play.
Yeah, I don't want to ignore Blasted Samophalange's vulnerable comment actually in chat here. Completely understand derivative proxy stuff. I just can't bring myself to create something that is Warhammer with the serial numbers filed off. I'd probably make more money if I did. And
yeah,
you probably would.
Yeah. So that is the key. That is the crux of all of this. Why is when we went to Gen Con, everything flying a 5e banner or 5e compatible banner or some form of that? Why does Tales of the Valiant care about being backwards compatible with a 5e audience or familiar to that audience?
Mhm.
It's the same thing here. It's like there is this massive, absolutely crazily huge audience that wants cool freaking miniatures.
Yep.
And there is a open niche here because GW sure as heck ain't providing 3D printed stuff. And let's also be super honest, GW's stuff looks great, but has a very specific aesthetic. So if you're not into that aesthetic, that's another
Oh, yeah.
reason to get out of it. Like Age of Sigmar stuff does look beautiful though. Like I
It
would just like
does.
flat out say Age of Sigmar stuff
I will
is
say some of the new minis
wonderfully
they
pretty.
had at Gen Con that I hadn't seen yet. I was like, wow,
Mhm.
they
Mhm.
are trying to pace their
Yeah.
quality and
Yeah.
rely on the things that injection molding can do that 3D printing can't, right? Like to create some geometries and some poses that would be difficult. I'm not saying impossible for 3D printer.
Yeah. Well, that injected molded plastic can get away with those like very tiny strands that support giant, not weigh nothing models.
Like this skull chain hanging off
Yeah.
of your demon wing situation. Yeah.
Right. Like it has the flex and the strength to do that. And
Mhm.
resin, you could do that. Just don't bump it.
Yeah, don't bump it, don't sneeze, don't breathe, don't let it. Yeah.
Uh,
I think there are a lot of answers here. Do you
Mhm.
want me to start throwing some at you?
Well, I think we're going to be on the same page of stuff. But like, there's this giant audience, and if you want to stay in business, you need to make money.
Mm-hmm.
And it turns out that appealing to that audience to some degree attracts money because
Yeah.
there's smaller audiences for other things.
Madness of John Bear Ross there. John Bear Ross says people
Mhm.
say they want original sculpts, races, concepts, but their buying habits say otherwise.
Exactly.
They do. And I think there's a couple reasons. On a level, people want gaming is social. We want to come together. We want to be part of a group. And
Mhm.
so to join into a niche hobby, yes, it kind of has that, as Blasted Salmon Flange said, hipster appeal, right? But
Mhm.
it's going to be by its very nature a more lonely situation. It's going to be harder to find people to play with. It's going to be more challenging to get people to understand. The chances, if you say I play Dungeons and Dragons or even Warhammer, especially after Henry Cavill
Right.
did his whole thing, people are like, oh yeah, that's that thing that like The Witcher's into, right? Like there's this cultural touch point
Mhm.
where you don't feel as ostracized. And a lot of us who are old in these hobbies felt plenty ostracized, even when we were coming up in these mainstream games. And the idea of like being like, I love Malifaux. I love Malifaux. I like almost everything Weird Games has done. I have played Malifaux like 6 times ever.
Mhm.
And I have probably five full teams worth of Malifaux stuff. They're gorgeous. They have an amazing aesthetic, but like I can't find anybody who even knows what it is, let alone for someone to play with.
Mhm.
And that I think is a good example of why these boutique situations are struggling. And then, of course, from the creator side, the game designer side, you're either going to do a couple things. You're going to get a super fan base that's like, like my company has about 500 really strong fans.
Mhm.
And if I make something, a percentage of them will buy everything I do.
Mhm.
That percentage is not enough to keep me full-time game designing. I have to branch out. And I wish that wasn't the case. Honestly, I would probably keep creating content for Pathfinder 1 for quite some time, but that's not going to keep the lights on.
Mhm. Yeah. And also, when people will say, I want something different, and even if you take them at their word, everybody's different is different, because the
Hmm.
second it's not the popular thing, it's going to be their not even their specific, but it's going to be a smaller niche that is going to be in a completely random direction and appeal to their specific tastes. And
Hmm.
getting enough of those to line up to be a business is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The curse of the heartbreaker.
Mhm.
Um, you
Oh my
know,
gosh. Oh my gosh.
I talk about this with RPG design all the time, where it's like if you're going to write a poem, and
Hmm.
these games are elaborate and they have whatever. So you're going to write a poem. Do you use the language that you live in, that you know and you have known since you were born, or
Hmm.
do you make up a new best language for your poem that nobody else will connect to whatsoever because it's going to be your language?
Hmm. Yeah.
And it sucks, but like, I had my little first heartbreaker. I think I was 19. It was very
Hmm.
Highlander inspired, like, because I liked the idea that what if experience was actual power? Like when you killed someone, you got their like energy.
Hmm.
And I thought it was the coolest thing ever. And like
Hmm.
nobody grokked it at all because it was so
Right.
weird.
Mhm. And to do, especially in modern things, it's just in the modern environment, just like in video games, the production standards that you need to meet to compete are so high
Hmm.
that if you're appealing to a niche audience of 500 people, like you just said, it comes really hard to justify that art budget, because like for those of you who do not know, art
Hmm.
is like the majority expense in tabletop gaming. It is like, it dwarfs everything else.
I
Fine,
can.
because you need even at best, even at the skimpiest amount of art, you're doing a piece of art every other page spread, and that
Mhm.
is that don't I don't really think that flies anymore.
No, and honestly, that's still ludicrous. I mean, I exceeded.
Hmm.
I'm not going to say numbers, but I exceeded my Kickstarter budget on art by,
Hmm.
I think, 400%.
Hmm.
Which was bad business, but it's still to this day. There are places where you turn 6 pages without a picture in my really, really big book. Let's be fair,
Right.
but
Yeah, your freaking thing is a phone book.
yeah, it's huge. But yeah, and that was still skipping 6, 7 pages now and then. 500% of the
Mhm.
actual art budget. And of course, when we're in a situation where there's ethical concerns about AI and stuff, you're not going to use that solve. And so
Mhm.
you've got the situation where you either do the strip down thing, and a lot of companies are going to the zine, to the black and white, to the old school pamphlet style stuff,
Mhm.
which works for some people. But when you're like, I'm sorry, a lot of us modern gamers now were imprinted on 3.5 and 40K, highly illustrated, highly graphical, treatments on every page.
Mhm.
Um, and that's what you want. You want to be
Mhm.
part of that crowd. And people, if they look at your product and they say, this looks like you made it in a Xerox machine with some staplers.
And yeah, but there used to be a time when that is exactly how that was made. Like the industry ran on stuff that looked
Oh,
like that. Yeah, yeah.
TSR, a lot of their old
Right.
books, some of the stuff I love, I like have worn to pieces on my shelf. It's
Mhm.
basically like library mimeograph almost
Mhm.
stuff.
And Don in chat has got very close to what we are actually at. Says, sorry, hit too soon. I prefer unique sculpts, but I also prefer to have a game to play them with. As game designers push into different areas, I love it when unique miniatures follow them. So here's the situation. Like that is the niche that like a lot of the 3D, like a ton of the 3D printed companies are occupying right now. Is like you can use these in those fun games. You can use these in whatever the most popular game you're playing, and they usually like hedge their bets because they provide them with base packs that fit like every possible game you would want to play this thing
Hmm.
with. Like if you want to go Old Hammer, fine. You want to go OPR, fine. You want to go Kings of War, fine. If you want to go Age of Sigmar, fine. Yeah, it's like all available, and of course 40K is supported all the wazoo for all the sci-fi stuff. Um, but the art style, it's com- very original most of the time, completely original a lot of the time. So it's like, yes, I can tell that that probably is meant to be this game stat profile and that use it, but it's a freaking ninja rat with a swirl of fan blades and not like the pestilence god or what
Right,
is the
right.
the
It's
avatar
Skaven Overlord
Skaven
God
thing?
thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
There's another piece to this that I think is
Mm-hmm,
interesting. If you look at 40K, which is as an
mm-hmm,
example, these games, D&D is the same way,
mm-hmm.
are served by edition churn.
Right.
So they want to basically force you to adapt a whole new game. And if you take out the lore and the art, it is a
Mm-hmm,
whole new game. And you are learning
mm-hmm,
a whole new game over and over and over again.
mm-hmm.
So I know people are like, oh, I'm just here for this tactical experience. I'm here to have this miniatures game. I'm here to get the win, win, win and tactics and da da da. But honestly, it is the lore and the art, the spirit of
Yes.
that genre is the thing that keeps people identifying these brands.
Mm-hmm.
And that spirit is actually what people are coming back to. They're not coming back. They're not coming back to 10th edition. They're coming back to Tyranids. They're coming back to dwarves that have, you know, their eternal grudge. I forget what the word is. They have a like sacred grudge situation. I forget how it works. But you know what I'm saying? That's the story. They're coming back for the narrative. They're coming back for the Forgotten Realms or Tiamat. They are not coming back for 5.5 or 1, whatever we're calling it, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and that I think is dangerous to compete with because now you're not just competing with 8th edition and 7th edition and whatever. You're competing with the entire legacy of those worlds.
Mm-hmm.
And that means you are, in D&D's case, you know, what, 50 years behind?
Right. I mean, there's been groups that have managed it. Paizo managed it. Galarian is like super beloved by its fan base.
Oh, yeah. But
Yeah.
again, there's also a segment of their fan base that just considers it another world in D&D's multiverse.
Yeah, this is true. Or the reverse, a bunch of people that just play Pathfinder rules in Forgotten Realms.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, like,
Yeah.
they got away a little.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, that's my Wednesday night game. We're playing Eberron setting using Pathfinder First Edition rules. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, and that's not a bad thing. You just get the use out of this content that you want. There's no wrong way to have your fun.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm not.
I would argue that it's not even. I think that what supports Games Workshop is its fan base for its settings. Like how many people are talking, laughing around. Like there, so much of their inner geek identity it revolves around like quoting "Red makes it go faster" and "For the Emperor" memes
Or
and
just,
all that jazz.
wah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
You know,
so many fans of the world and the lore they've made there. But I think these communities, when it comes to actually putting miniatures on the table, which is like a tiny fraction of that group, by the way,
mm-hmm.
actually putting miniatures on the table and rolling
And then
dice.
an actual smaller group that paints them.
Yeah, that actually what they're attracted to is that's the biggest group of game. That's the game I can get a game in with.
Mm-hmm.
Is what's attracting them to those games. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
and that is incredibly insular. And as somebody who's run game stores and handled organized play across, and play groups, it's actually very cellular. It's not quite as uniform as you think, but like your particular area will have a group of options available to you that is populated, and that changes from area to area. But there's a few ones that are usually you can find. So
Yeah.
like one of my local groups here has got like gosh, what do they I even forget this game. It's like a monster. I don't play it, but it's like a bunch of monster apocalypse. It's got a
Oh,
huge monster
yeah.
apocalypse scene that meets every week, and like dozens of players get together to play monster apocalypse. But there's also the 40K scene, and there's of course the D&D scene, and the Magic Night is crazy, and the Pokemon Night is crazy. So these big games always happen and are will usually happen in your area, and then you'll have a subset of other things that have managed to have like a group of gamers have built a community around it locally, and that'll be
Right.
your options.
You like
But
here, for instance,
Mhm.
we had a War Machine store, and
Right.
it was an outlier
Mhm.
where that store specifically it blew 40K and like created a whole region of the city
Yeah.
where people were War Machine people and they were Hordes people.
Yeah, that was us too. Like Warhammer got kicked out. Well, not kicked out, but like everybody that was playing Warhammer back then, when I think it was in second edition War Machine. I forget what
That
it was
sounds
actually
right.
called,
That sounds right.
Prime or something like that.
Yeah.
Um, was the thing, and for like 2 years, that is what we played.
Hmm.
Um, and that was that.
And then just kind of went away,
Hmm.
which I'm still not sure I understand.
As I
But
understand it, there's some controversies with the company and like some decisions with the game, and like they made an edition change that didn't go over well.
well,
So like the things that you commonly see that make a game
sure.
fall out of popular. Because if you're that niche game, you're that much at risk to
Right.
just being
You
yesterday's
can't. You
fad.
can't just. You can't have that one miss, right?
Yeah, we were talking about it last week with Lurkana. It's like odds are Lurkana is just this year's fad. We might be
Probably,
wrong.
but it might survive off of Disney fandom.
Right. We
And I
don't
think
know how that's going to work.
that's interesting to this. That is almost a proof for our theories here, because if Lorcana can like go the distance,
Mhm.
a la Hercules, that was an unintentional reference, but
Mhm.
that might prove the theory if the IP and the lore of Disney's metaverse
Mhm.
is powerful enough to carry a brand new game into prominence. Kind of like I actually think Final Fantasy 14 was the last time we saw that, where an MMO player jumped in. I know there was 11, and people love 11, but 14 was that time that it broke through WoW big, and even had a false start with Realm Reborn situation.
Right.
But it had that power of all the other fandom of Final Fantasy behind it, and got to like break through to that point where it kind of hit like a zeitgeist level,
Mhm.
and really was the only thing that ever lasted or has lasted against WoW, as WoW being the prominent lore of MMO space, right?
Yeah, but here's the thing, that awesome license you have is also your gigantic Achilles heel, as we have seen with this, as Star Wars fans
Oh,
of the various games have said,
tragedy.
that license is
Mhm.
ephemeral.
It's true.
Disney giveth and Disney taketh away. And if
Sure.
Lorcana can only last as long as they have that license.
Mhm.
And the second that license disappears, that entire game is toast. And we've seen it happen to many iterations of Star Wars games over the years, so many Star Trek games over the years.
Yeah.
We've even seen it happen with Robotech, for goodness sake. And we used to think that was freaking eternity in the gaming sphere. Palladium's Robotech game, oh my gosh, I'm surprised that ever changed hands. And it's just like so many examples of that. If you are tying the success of your product, it's like that closely to somebody else's brand, you are not in control of your audience.
It's true.
You're
I mean,
borrowing.
they weren't in control of their lines, so why would I expect anything else?
Oh yeah.
Yes, I apologize. Anybody who knows me in any gaming space will be hearing me complain about the lines for Lorcana for years.
I will laugh about it, but I'm not going to complain about it anymore, because that's a story that is done. And as far as I can tell,
what's that about bearded people who hold grudges in a sacred manner?
That's going in the book.
It's going in the book. That's it. The Book of Grudges.
Mm-hmm.
Lorcana is just like a whole chapter header for me.
So, like, and honestly, everything we just said about Games Workshop also applies to Dungeons and Dragons, because that's the other giant segment in this. So you've got these two ginormous brands that influences the entirety of tabletop miniature gaming.
Well, and here's a point of nuance, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have talked about how D&D isn't nearly the market share that 40K is with this influence, the shadow, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're calling it the shadow of influence.
Mm-hmm.
Interestingly enough, D&D historically died the death of many genres, at least according to some people, by creating too much diversity in its IP.
We need to be very careful with how we say too much diversity here.
Well, no, yes, sorry, too much variance.
Right.
They split their party. How's that? Is that a better D&D flavor? A lot of people didn't like Birthright. A lot of people didn't want to take up Eberron.
Yeah.
And
so this is very famous in many of the dissections of how TSR fell.
Which I actually think wasn't the main reason that they had a problem. But but it is often cited, and it is something that has split their fan base.
I mean, I've talked with Lisa Stevens about this, and like, yeah, like we recorded this many, many times on
Mhm.
podcasts, and like she's the one who literally went into the financial department and dissected that. Like it was
Mhm.
her job to do that. So I trust her judgment
Mhm.
on this because like literally her profit margins depended on getting this right and proved to.
Right.
And it was distributed. That was part A. And secondly, they had lost so much track with their expenses that they were literally releasing product that cost them more to make than they got when they sold it.
Right. Right. Which I adore because I loved all of it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and super excited about my Discovery Day, but I won't talk about it on the show. But yeah, the that Hydra Head, regardless of its reality fiscally for TSR, did split the community
Mm-hmm.
because I found myself at odds with Greyhawk fans when I was
Mm-hmm.
saying I was a Forgotten Realms fan. But then if I went to I'd said, but I also like the circle of, whatever and Bigby and all this stuff and talked about, Greyhawk, then the Forgotten Realms fans shut me out sometimes. And so it
Mm-hmm.
created a more like fragmented customer base.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's part of why D&D didn't achieve that kind of like 40K monolithic for the Emperor, I detect the heresy, etc. cultural energy.
Right. Because they tried to do too many official settings simultaneously and it divided their customer base.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is why Pathfinder's Galarian has just as much variety in it very much explicitly. Not maybe not just as much, but has a ton of nods towards those classic settings as locations, but has unified them into one thing.
Slightly
So that you
implausible thing. Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. I call it the greatest kitchen sink because it is
Yes.
absolutely the kitchen sink setting, but they did it so well, and then they embraced that with the society. They embraced that whole concept that all of these things just mix and trade with each other all the time, and you're going to end up in a party with a vampire
Mm-hmm.
from not Transylvania and a Wild West gunslinger and a
Not
barbarian
Ravenloft. Yeah.
wielding a laser sword and
Well, it was kind of like they said, okay, we're going to take this half of the main continent. It's going to basically be Toril again. And we're going to take this half of the continent and it's going to be like Ravenloft, but there's also going to be like this weird demon planescapey bit. And then there's going to be like this down here. And like, we have Eberron, that's kind of the mana waste area, which even like Mournland's mana waste, not going to say any more than that. But like, yeah, it is, nailed it. It is all the campaign settings in one setting. So they're trying to avoid the thing. But yeah. It still feels a little too hodgepodge because of that to me.
yeah, I kind of just embrace the hodgepodge. It's just like enjoy the pulpy, like this is a Saturday morning cartoon, and this week we guest starring.
Sure. It's interesting to compare it to, say, Radiant Citadel, which has 14 new worlds in it, but they're just, here's the city on this world, here's kind of what's around it, and then it's just do whatever you want with the rest of it, because that's the 5e way, right? Just do whatever, fill in the rest of it yourself.
I mean, it's easy to do. The math's not hard.
Yeah. Anywho.
Oh, I really like 5e. I'm not gonna lie. I do like
I
5e.
have really swung around on it. Like, I love PF1, I love my crunchy bits, I love 3.5. I love narrative systems like Cypher. I'm learning, Monster of the Week and stuff, but 5e is kind of in that middle lane that's kind of like a little bit of everything and a little bit of vagueness to just do whatever you need to do with the rest of it.
Okay. And I'm appreciating it more the more I play Baldur's Gate 3, like every other breathing person on this
Wait, you
planet.
started playing Baldur's Gate 3? Is this why I haven't heard like half as much from you as normal?
I have like got not enough hours for that to be true in that game. But like the few hours I get, I have been playing some Baldur's Gate 3.
Blasted Salmon Flinch just said there are times that hodgepodge settings can work. Rifts, 100% agree. And Rifts made those distinct worlds, so it was.
I think you're all
more plausible.
I think it's an interesting argument that infinite access to multiverses is more plausible than
way more plausible than just having like a neighborhood. Yeah.
Oh gosh, there's an argument to be had because like, oh my gosh,
we'll duke this out, but we don't have enough time this
yeah,
episode.
we do not. I will just say that history has proven that you can have this much variety in a single world.
Sure, but can you have enough to base an entire campaign of bad guys out of it? I don't know. If you've got an endless world of Cthulhu horror monsters, it's much more likely that the party can fight them 16 times. Where if there's only... What's that?
That's a lot of times fighting Cthulhu hordes.
You've seen my minis.
I see. I don't mind. This week I'm fighting Cthulhu hordes, and next week it's the robots from space.
Yeah. That's actually a personal pain point because I've always liked Magitech, Final Fantasy Magitech. Yes, they're robots, but we don't call them robots. Galorian called them robots, and now my players call them robots. And no matter what I can do, they're called robots. And that is a verisimilitude deal breaker for me sometimes, and I kind of want to shake them.
It's because they literally are robots because they're from advanced civilizations,
they're
not
from Starfighter. And quite frankly, my favorite news about Paizo is that SF2 is going to be completely compatible and integrated with PF2.
And that would be nice.
Then I can have my Rifts setting with PF2 SF2.
When Starfinder First Edition came out, I thought it was just practice run for Pathfinder Second Edition, and that it was going to still be compatible. But it turned out that was not what happened at all. Yeah. All right, we have run out of time, and we honestly, there's so much to this topic. I really wish we had more time, but we are at our hour. Is there anything you want to shout out to, Kristen?
Well, I'm just going to shout out to our creatives, the people who are in chat here, and just anybody who listens to this. Just because the market is stepping on your throat, asking you to make grimdark stuff, does not mean you have to do it. If you cultivate your fan base, you can survive.
I want to also show out, if you decide to do it because you want to stay in business, that's also not a bad choice.
Yeah, we won't judge you for that either. In fact, I'll probably sub to you anyway, because
I sure as heck can't judge you.
Yeah, no. But I just want that out there. I want it out there, like Blasted Slime Flange and, all of our regular designers in here, Herberto, everybody, just seriously, keep creating. Please.
There's nothing wrong with being a GW fan. I want to throw that out there too.
I
like For the Emperor. Emperor's Text-to-Speech Engine is like one of my favorite YouTube shows, and I'm going to be playing the crap out of Bolt Gun again here soon. So I like all of this stuff, and there's nothing wrong with any of this game.
Keep creating. Do what you got to do to survive, but also don't let it kill you by forcing you to make endless Imperial bolters.
But let's answer. We haven't answered the question. Answered the question. Can it escape this shadow?
Not unless a new zeitgeist, a new community lore replaces it. I don't think so.
I think that D&D is escaping its zeitgeist, and not because something replaced D&D. Instead, because something replaced D&D. Because we've seen a generational shift, and what is considered D&D today is unrecognizable to what I would have considered D&D in the 80s.
And if you want a whole nother topic, the tactical decision to take the biggest live play and not do a 5e compatible follow-up game, that's a whole thing right there. That's crazy. Anyway.
All right. If you want to follow up what we're doing or watch any of our previous shows or any of this awesome content, you can do so over at printyourgames.com. You can also find us on all the socials at Print Your Games, usually at Print Your Games on the other socials, except for YouTube where it's /Param. And until next time, I'm Jefferson J. Thacker, also known as Param.
I'm Kristen Sowers, also known as Seventh Mastery, and don't forget to use your screen protector, at least until one's built into your printer for you.
You still have to replace them, so it's going to be, don't remember to check your screen protector.
Yeah, we'll figure out a new line when it gets that ubiquitous.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.